Greetings, members one and all of the Salivation Nation. The verdict is in. Guilty for precious metals traders at JPMorgan have betrayed the precious metals markets. Let's explore. This news really just breaking and was shared with me by HVAC Residential Basics. JPMorgan gold and silver traders have been found guilty after a long spoofing trial. But I'm going to be talking about why there may not be jail time associated with this, and that's what we all really want to see. So let's take a look at this. This comes to us from Bloomberg by way of Yahoo Finance. The former head of JPMorgan Chase & Company Precious Metals business and his top trader were convicted in Chicago on charges that they manipulated markets for years, handing the U.S. government a win in its long crackdown on bogus spoofing orders. Michael Nowak and Greg Smith were found guilty this past Wednesday by a federal jury after a 3-week trial and more than 8 days of deliberations. Prosecutors presented evidence that included detailed trading records, chat logs, and testimony by former co-workers who pulled back the curtain on how Nowak and Smith moved precious metals prices up and down for profit from 2008 to 2016. Indeed. And this is something that I have been documenting on this channel since this case began. We know precious metals manipulation exists. We know it exists in other markets. In fact, manipulation in general is something that has been occurring for many, many years, even before these folks were born. And largely, a lot of it has to do with what the government and big banks do. Mainly the government, the Federal Reserve, central banks around the world. It's their job to manipulate. A third defendant, Jeffrey Ruffo, who was a salesman on the bank's precious metals desk, was acquitted of charges he participated in the conspiracy. The case was the biggest yet in a crackdown by the U.S. Justice Department. Nowak, the managing director in charge of the desk, and Smith, its top trader, were convicted of fraud, spoofing, and market manipulation. The government alleged the precious metal business at JPMorgan was run as a criminal enterprise, though the jury acquitted all 3 men of a separate racketeering charge, which is why they may not see prison time. They had the power to move the market, the power to manipulate the worldwide price of gold, prosecutor A.V. Perry said during closing arguments. U.S. District Court Judge Edmund Chang said Nowak and Smith will be sentenced next year. So they got a little bit of time to think about it. Each faces decades in prison, though it may be far less. 2 Deutsche Bank AG traders convicted of spoofing in 2020 were each sentenced to a year in prison. So likely that may be the most they ever get out of this is 1 year. But I hope they do get something like that, for sure. While we are gratified that the jury acquitted Mr. Nowak of racketeering and conspiracy, we are extremely disappointed by the jury's verdict on the whole, and will continue to seek to vindicate his rights in court, his lawyer, David Meister, said in an email, which means likely this case will be appealed and could be drawn out, which means that sentencing may be years down the road. An attorney for Smith didn't respond to messages seeking comment. Rufo's lawyer, Guy Petrillo, said in an email, Mr. Rufo, his family, and we always believed in Jeff's innocence and are grateful that these unfortunate charges are now behind him. JPMorgan, the largest U.S. bank, agreed in 2020 to pay $920 million to settle Justice Department spoofing allegations against it, by far the biggest fine by any financial institution accused of market manipulation since the financial crisis. I also covered that news on this channel as well. With Wednesday's verdict, the Justice Department has secured convictions of 10 former traders at Wall Street financial institutions, including JPMorgan, Merrill Lynch and Company, Deutsche Bank, and the Bank of Nova Scotia and Morgan Stanley. Assistant Attorney General Kenneth Polite Jr. said in a statement. So there you have it. There's other cases of manipulation. Now, manipulation is a broad term, and in this case, it was used by way of spoofing. That was the tool in order to place these orders and then to cancel them in order to move the markets up or down for selfish gain. The selfish gain of each of those involved and the bank itself. That was a motivation. So it doesn't matter which way it goes as long as they profit, and you can profit on both ends of the trade. Today's conviction demonstrates that no matter how complex or long-running a scheme is, the FBI is committed to bring those involved in crimes like this to justice. Assistant Director Luis Casada of the FBI's criminal investigation said in a statement, "The criminal case against some of the biggest players in the precious metals market was closely watched. Spoofing became illegal with the passage of the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010. It's something that's been in the minds of many people who are involved in the precious metals markets in that point in time. And I would say this verdict closes a chapter," said Phil Streibel, the chief market strategist at Blue Line Futures. "This kind of thing has been going on for at least 15 years or more with people waiting for justice, and I never thought it would ever get closed." Dennis Kelleher, co-founder and chief executive officer at Better Markets, an organization advocating stricter financial regulation, said the verdicts should signal to Wall Street's biggest financial firms and executive that they are not above the law. And let's hope that it is stopped. Now, there's other people that believe that manipulation is continuing, and more specifically, they believe there is price suppression, especially when you see these large contracts being dumped in the early trading hours. I believe that warrants an explanation at the least and an investigation at the most as to why these things occur in these off-trading hours, especially these large dumps that would seemingly mean that the price is going down. And are there occasions where there are large buys at any given point in time? Things that certainly need to be explained at the very least. So the star witnesses at the criminal trial were former co-workers who said they participated in the spoofing activity for years. Traders John Edmonds and Christian Truntz testified about market manipulation by all three defendants at JPMorgan, while trader Corey Flom described similar behavior when he worked with Smith and Rufo at Bear Stearns before it was acquired by JPMorgan in 2008. The JPMorgan case wasn't a complete victory for prosecutors. All three defendants were acquitted of violating the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. That's the RICO statute, a law more commonly used against gangs or mafias. Jurors didn't agree with claims by prosecutors that the JPMorgan Precious Metals desk was run as a criminal enterprise. No witnesses or chat logs presented during the trial showed the defendants openly discussing their intent to spoof. Of course, they would be fools if they did that. Racketeering charges also are part of the federal government's case against Bill Long, whose Archeos Capital Management collapsed last year and cost banks billions of dollars. So yes, indeed. So fascinating indeed, a fascinating verdict, and it's good news. At least justice was done here, even if they didn't make the case against spoofing. But here's an image, I guess, of all three of the individuals at the brunt of this, the focus of this case. We'll see what the sentencing looks like if it does indeed occur next year. But likely there will be appeals and more trials to come. This will probably be drawn out. A lesson here to be learned is to not spoof and not manipulate. But again, people have different reasons for doing it. These people did it for financial gain. And selfish gain is typically what is the precipice for anything that happens. There is no greater good here, even if that greater good is evil. To me, it's very difficult to make a case that there is a grand conspiracy against a cabal to suppress the price of gold and silver. I could be wrong. Again, as I mentioned, there is some anecdotal evidence that we've seen in some of these markets, but I think it needs further explanation or investigation. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch, and to encourage you to please rate. That means thumb up this video, share it, comment, even if it's just algorithm food, to let me know you're here. I appreciate it. We've seen a lot more of that happen lately, and it's very appreciated. So comment and subscribe.